We are ever closer to Penn State versus Michigan, and this is the time where we get to cross it over with another Locked On show. But we're going to go with a neutral party here to help preview the Michigan Wolverines and get maybe some of the signs of how we can expect Michigan to play on Saturday.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And that is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, bringing you all things Penn State Nittany Lions. And joining me, a very special guest. I helped him out with Locked On Big Ten, so I appreciate the favor being returned. That is Craig Shemon, who does an absolute incredible job over at Locked On Big Ten. Encourage everybody to go check out that show to get a bigger overview of what's going on in the conference. He is going to act as the crossover for Locked On Wolverines in this case, and I know that Craig will do a great job because he's been talking Michigan, Ohio State, the Big Ten, right? And he's an expert on Penn State as well. So, Craig, thank you for joining me on the show.
It's my pleasure. And it seems like I've been talking about, I feel like Locked On Wolverines guy, because I've been talking about Michigan like all week, like last week and a half. It's just been all Jim Harbaugh. So I'm glad to actually talk some football, but we can talk about off the field stuff too. But I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Now, like everybody knows these crossover episodes, or at least getting familiar with them. We start with the storylines for both sides of it, and then get into some key matchups, some breakout players, or who could have the biggest performances, and then predictions, understanding the game flow and how this one's going to result, and even a final score prediction as well. So, Craig, of course, we'll start with you. Michigan has had I don't even know where to begin with the storylines, and it's so back and forth. I can summarize it as best as I can, just trying to keep up with it, because first it was Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, and Connor Stallions allegedly went to all these lengths to steal signs from opponents, sending a guy to Penn State versus UMass. Apparently Connor Stallions was allegedly, right? I'm going to use the word allegedly a lot. Right. Was on the sideline of Central Michigan versus Michigan State. And then now comes this counter argument. I don't know if I can call it a counter suit or whatever it was, that the Big Ten has conspired together. The other schools in the Big Ten have teamed up together to steal Michigan signs. So as the Michigan expert, what the heck is going on? How can you translate it for the Penn State fan base here?
Well, first of all, you did a great job there, because I call this the octopus story, because it literally has 8 different shoot-off stories, and you just hit half of them right there. And the one I think is the most interesting, really, and it's not getting any play at all, is the Connor Stallions Central Michigan story, because people forget Jim McElwain, in between the time he was fired at Florida and the time he took the Central Michigan job, he was the wide receivers coach at Michigan in 2019. And that overlaps when Connor Stallions has been, they have to have had known each other. And now you fast forward to September 1st of the Chippewas game against Michigan State, and there's this mystery figure on the sideline. These coaches have been with each other every day for the last, 8 weeks coming up to this game. Are you going to tell me not one assistant coach looked over to Connor or whoever that was on the sideline and said, "Yo, dude, who are you? You're wearing the coach's shirt. You're not one of us." Jim McElwain knows who this guy was. I think it was Connor Stallions. I think Jim McElwain knew who it was. I think he knew a press pass was issued, and the NCAA is going to bore down on that, and they're going to start investigating that. They already have. And I think that's the side angle, the thread in the sweater to watch on this story as it unfolds. We've all got our eye on the ball on Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, and that's where it should be. But wait to see what happens with this Central Michigan investigation as well. I'm very intrigued by that. But yeah, there are so many different storylines going on. I don't even know if Harbaugh is going to be on the sideline Saturday against Penn State or not. We're still waiting for the suspension to come down or not. I read a report today at 4:30 this afternoon that I'm wondering if the Big Ten's getting cold feet legally. They may lean toward just a significant fine and a public admonishment of Jim Harbaugh, which would be great for the Wolverines because they got more money than anybody, and a fine means nothing.
Yep. Yeah, that's somebody was saying that too. About $1 to $2 million would essentially be chump change for these institutions. And this it almost so the Houston Astros, and I can't go off too much of a tangent here. The Houston Astros, the reason all of this came to light is because they requested immunity, they got it, and basically, well, we'll trade honesty for, or we'll trade, you know, I guess the word I'm looking for is innocence, right? Or no punishment. We'll trade no punishment for our honesty. And I don't know if it's going to come to that for Michigan. It seems like the storybook is almost setting up. Okay, Jim Harbaugh doesn't necessarily ride off into the sunlight, but NFL jobs have been calling his name for quite some time now. He's been flirting with the NFL, returning to the NFL, and wanting to leave Michigan. And there's been some disagreements behind the scenes, but I can't speak too much of it because I don't know. From a Michigan Penn State matchup, though, Craig, is this has to be distracting the team. There is too much noise. I get the whole embracing it thing. And well, if we're the villain, if we're hated by the nation, so be it. But these are still college kids, young adults that are still just experiencing true adversity for the first time. Like, this is serious. You're being accused of cheating. Blake Corum is apparently in a shady financial deal with someone, right? It's so allegedly. I got to say that allegedly. I don't want the show to get pinged, but when you look at this, is Michigan really able to block all of this out, or is it a huge distraction and a benefit for Penn State in this case?
It's in the Blake Corum thing. I honestly believe that one he didn't know about. I think Blake Corum used his number and his information and used his name on setting up an LLC out of Wisconsin. He claims Blake Corum says that somebody told him, "Hey, this is on the internet today before practice on Tuesday," and he got his lawyers on it. I actually think that Connor's a little shaky and that Blake Corum didn't know what was going on. I may be naive there,
right?
But as far as remaining laser focused, they have been to this point. Look, I've watched every Michigan game this year, except the one. I think I've all but one of the games I've seen. I've seen all the Penn State games and everybody as well, and they are laser focused. I don't know how they do it. Maybe that's one of Jim Harbaugh's best assets, that he's able to get this team to focus. But I will also tell you this. They have appeared focused against their schedule up to this point. They have not played anybody of the caliber of Penn State. They have certainly not played a road game like they will see at Beaver Stadium. Now, being in front of 100,000 fans is no big deal. They do that every week, but it's different when they're cheering for you versus against you. So look, this is the first test of Michigan. They've had the easiest, slowest ramp up to the tough part of their schedule that I've ever seen. And that could be a huge factor in this game on Saturday. But so far, they have appeared laser focused on the mission, and that's to play football games.
Well, for the detriment of Penn State, that's not exactly good. You would hope that this would at least set them off course slightly. Let's flip it over to Penn State's side of things. The storylines here are that, well, Penn State has no chance. A lot of people have sold out on this team. I still believe that Penn State's on an island, right? They're not good enough to be in that elite status, but they're almost too good to be considered great. Like they're all alone because they beat up on everybody else. But then when it comes to Ohio State and Michigan, I don't want to say that they don't have a chance, but there's still a gap. I thought the gap was going to be closed against Ohio State. I told you that on your show. A lot of us here thought that in Happy Valley, and it wasn't the case. Maybe it's because the horseshoe was too big for Drew Aller, who is from Ohio, right? These are 19, 20-year-old young adults, some of them kids that have to, like I said, deal with adversity. And so I can understand if that was an overly emotional game for Aller and Penn State, a James Franklin legacy game, right? But this one's a little different. Everyone is, instead of singing your praises, now it's flipped over to criticism. James Franklin's overrated. Let's push him out of Penn State again, especially if he doesn't win the Michigan game. He's no good. And that drum is getting louder once again here. That's the kind of talk that football sports teams in general respond to. I how do you perceive, and then the whole number 418, that was the rushing total that Michigan had last season.
Yeah.
I think Penn State definitely something shifted. Penn State still has that, like, hey, we're playing football. This is serious. There's still an element of fun to it, but it's not like the way it was, throw it deep, messing with reporters. There's not a dark cloud over the Penn State football facilities right now. However, there is an element of no nonsense, all business going into this one, whereas against Ohio State, that wasn't exactly the case.
That's an interesting perspective by you. Now, full disclosure, I'm an Indiana grad, so if I had a football team that went 10-2 every year and only lost to Ohio State and Michigan, we would be absolutely thrilled. So
Exactly.
maybe a little
Exactly.
perspective. But so and like you said, they're really good. This Penn State is one of the best teams in the country, but they may only be the third best in the division of their conference. Look, this is a must-win game for Penn State, no doubt about it. I spent a lot of time over the summer talking them up and thinking that this team is good enough to get to the finish line. I didn't think they beat both Michigan and Ohio State, but I certainly had a thought that maybe they could split. In fact, I thought maybe all three teams would split at the time. This is before the season got going, and that's still on the table. If Penn State wins this football game, you said a lot of people think they can't win this game. They can win this game. This is a talent.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're gonna or not, but they have the talent. You and I've talked before that they seem to be lacking one element, and that is some kind of vertical explosiveness on offense. And I think that's a legitimate concern, but everything else is in place. This is a deep football team. There's more than one way to win a football game, and we can get into that a little bit on the strategies that I think both teams will have here. But this team's too good to not be taken seriously in this game. And maybe you're right, Michigan. Maybe they will be a little distracted because, again, Penn State's a different kind of opponent. Michigan hasn't faced an opponent like this all season long, and you keep this game close. You get it to be smash mouth with the running backs on both sides. I think maybe it could be a pretty interesting football game. I know I can't wait to watch. And by the way, I'll throw out a little plug. Lockdown Big Ten is going to go live on YouTube as soon as this game is over, about 3:30-ish or so. So I know I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'll be at Beaver Stadium, so we'll have standard post game. So yeah, by all means, shout that out, and then check out Locked On Nittany Lions post game coverage as well. With that, I think that's a good segue. You started to get into tease a little bit of the matchups here, and that's what our second segment is devoted to. The names you need to know, the matchups that are going to dictate the outcome of this game, have the biggest impact. Let's discuss in just a moment, but first, a word from one of our great sponsors on today's episode, and that is Jace Medical. We spend a lot of time talking together, you and I, and we get fired up together on wins and losses. Who starts, who sits. I'm thankful for the connection that you and I have as the audience. And today I want to chat a little more about something personal when it comes to Jace Medical. Whether you're on extended travel, bracing for major weather event, or limited to yet another supply shortage, you are covered. Thanks to our partners at Jace Medical, life-saving antibiotics and a long list of daily medications can be ordered in a 1-year supply. Even ED generics for Cialis and Viagra. Go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. A verified customer had this to say about Jace. I am thankful for the service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half just to have it. I ordered most of my meds daily with a year's supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit. I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies. I highly recommend this for everyone. If you or someone you love would like to get some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any of your daily medications, go to jacemedical.com. It's as simple as that to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use promo code Locked On for $20 off your purchase. That is Jace Medical. And the Locked On Podcast Network amps up college football coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff live across the Locked On College YouTube channels, all of them, including Locked On Nittany Lions, from starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time every Friday. The big matchups, Penn State, Michigan, of course, all the other conference, and there's a lot of one-loss teams out there that are going to be competing for that fourth playoff spot. It's going to get real intriguing there, and it's discussed, broken down, all on Locked On College Football Kickoff live on YouTube, live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and listen to it back wherever you get your podcast. Let's pick back up with it, Craig. The key matchups, the names to know on both sides. I know that Michigan has a few injury concerns, like Penn State. Jim Harbaugh isn't exactly open about who's available, who's 100%, who's not. Pretty tight to the vest there. But outside of Will Johnson, the other boundary cornerbacks have at least question marks of their availability. They didn't know if they were going to have them going into Purdue, and that's Penn State. They don't know if they're going to have Trey Wallace, so it's almost like an eye for an eye in this case. The number 2, the number 3 cornerbacks for Michigan, Penn State's clear-cut number 2 wide receiver, even though Dante Cephas is emerging, but through the entire offseason, and even still to this point, James Franklin hasn't openly, I want to say, sung the praises of Dante Cephas, because it's always been Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Wallace. Every single time you ask him, hey, what's the progress in the wide receiver room? It's Wallace and KLS. Stop asking me, right? It's the same answer every single time for the past 6 months, it seems to be. So I feel like Will Johnson versus KLS is a big matchup, and then keeping an eye on the health of Michigan's other cornerbacks.
Well, and I tell you what, Michigan, they've really impressed me all season long with their defensive backs. I actually like Mike Sainristil, the best back there. He's just kind of a ball hawk, no matter who else is out there. Whether he's usually a nickelback, so he comes in those situations. I think the key, the biggest player coming back, and maybe you can tell me. I think Chop Robinson's getting ready. He's going to come back in this game. Is he not? Is that the case?
He will. He practiced in full. He did dress for Maryland, even though he was inactive and didn't really go through all of the warmups. I think that might have been for formality. He did. He played at Maryland. He played at that College Park football stadium. That was a big deal for him to miss that game. But he practiced in full. There were no limitations for him. There were no limitations for Amin Vanover as well. But on the offensive side of things, because Penn State's problem isn't the defense, and they've shown that they can succeed without Chop Robinson. They still held Ohio State in check, even when both of those guys went down for injury. Robinson left fairly, not early in the game, but about halfway through, and Penn State still held an Ohio State offense to up until the Marvin Harrison Jr. touchdown. They held them in the teens. So and 1.9 yards per carry, mind you, as well. So you lose 2 defensive linemen who are very good at stopping the run, and Ohio State only gets 1.9 yards per carry. But I get it. 418 for Michigan, 418 from last year. I get it.
While you're sitting there talking about that, I was thinking of another matchup that I think is worthy of watching. I assume Kalen King's going to be Oliver Roman Wilson. Roman Wilson is he's all of a sudden, when they're in trouble, JJ McCarthy just finds him in the end zone. I think he's got like 10 touchdowns already this year. And but Kalen King, he's going to be playing on Sundays as well. I'd be interested if that was the one-on-one matchup or whether they're going to move people around or not. At the end of the day, Zach, I think that both teams will come out here and they will try and take advantage of their running backs. You got 4 of the best running backs in the country with
all NFL running backs.
Of course, you got Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, and I just think both teams will try to establish that in the get-go and in the early going. And when they do, I expect a lot of 9, 10, 12 play drives. Well, not a lot, a significant amount. And, if you have a lot of those, that kind of shortens the game. That's less possessions later on. So right now, I'll tell you, I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I think the over-under is around 45. I don't think it'll hit that because I think both sides will have some pretty healthy, lengthy drives, ball control, all that. And, JJ McCarthy, he can hit anybody at any place in the field if he needs to go to the passing game. That's the thing that makes Michigan so tough. And I think the shame of all this Spygate stuff that's going on. Well, they started winning 2 years ago when the spying was allegedly going on. And you look at this roster, man, it is good enough to win against.
Did they need it all along
without any help whatsoever? So, and look, I think Drew Aller's a pretty accurate quarterback too. They kind of keep him, on a short leash. They don't have the deep threat. They don't throw deep a lot. I still laugh at the press conference that was, I think, 3 weeks ago. Hey, James Franklin, when are you guys going to just start chucking it down the field for the heck of it? And he just kind of laughed. I think we had talked about that because I think that had just happened right when I talked to you last. And, but I do think they need to have a little more explosiveness. I do think Drew Aller's accurate enough to put the ball pretty much wherever it needs to go. I don't know if he's as accurate as JJ McCarthy, but McCarthy's a little older and a lot more experienced. But I think it's going to be a ground and pound, old fashioned Big Ten football game for the most part. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, it depends what Penn State. I was waiting for Penn State. I almost thought that they were in a position like Ohio State and Michigan have in the past where they could conceal some more of their bread and butter plays. But yeah, it kind of caught with my hand in the cookie jar here is that was not the case. Because if Penn State had that situation, they would have ran it against Ohio State. And instead of opening up their playbook, it feels like they scaled it back because not everybody was available. In Penn State's case, they're actually very healthy. Offensive line, they're bumps and bruises, of course. Everybody's bruised up at this point, Craig. We all know that. Michigan's got bumps and bruises. But for Penn State, you would think that maybe 2 offensive linemen would be missing, or maybe some of the depth had taken a hit. Penn State's got all of its offensive linemen available. Crazy enough, and that's what all that work has gone into with James Franklin and offensive line coach Phil Troutwine. Running backs are very healthy, and that's why Penn State has done what it's done in Michigan. Now, Ohio State has dealt with its fair share of injuries to the running back spot. But Michigan and Penn State don't have to burn the tread on the tires, and that's what James Franklin has said all along. We want both of our running backs to be healthy and fresh going into the fourth quarter because that's when it's most important. So the calls for, well, it should just be Katron Allen running the football 100% of the time because Nicholas Singleton can't get it done. I'd still argue that Nicholas Singleton is the best athlete on the offense anyway. Maybe the team, maybe. That's up for, there's Abdul Carter and Chop Robinson, right? I'm talking pure athlete. But on offense, it's Singleton. And I really want to see Penn State get creative and not just hand the football off with Singleton not getting a full burst, a full-headed, a start, basically a start at the starting line there. And it almost seems like Singleton, who has that big play, that explosiveness, has lost a little bit of his confidence because he's not hurt, he's not banged up, he's perfectly fine. So what is it? It's got to be mental at this point. Coaches and players and teammates would never admit that. But I think when it's just not working the way it did a year ago in the whole sophomore slump thing, I look to Singleton to try to break open and have some of those, but that's coaching. So yes, it's going to be ground and pound in a slugfest just by nature, Craig, because these two defenses analytically are 1 and 2 or both in the top 3, whichever rankings you look at. I've looked at all the numbers to see, and it's Penn State and Michigan. Michigan seems to be the consensus one. Penn State kind of cycles between 2, 3. But you're getting 2 top 3 defenses. So I imagine that and Michigan's not as good as they were at running the football last season. Last season, it was 6.5 yards per carry. This year, it's 4.5. That's a 2-yard drop off. And look at the competition they play.
I think that's a valid argument. And, people won't really be too startled looking at the stat. Most games, I mean, the yards per carry is obvious, like you said, so it's almost 2 yards less. But, Blake Corum hasn't really busted out with any 120-yard rushing games. He usually has them between 60 and 80. Donovan Edwards chips in a few, although Donovan Edwards hasn't been able to find the end zone.
Very quiet. He's been very quiet.
Yeah. But although they're almost run a formula here. If they get down to the goal line, it's going to be Blake Corum. He gets in the end zone. I think he's got 16 touchdowns already this year. Donovan's got 1. I think Donovan's more shiftier. He's a guy that can come out of the backfield and catch a pass. But Blake Corum is their, pounded up to in between the tackles guy. But yeah, overall, it's funny. You look at the numbers with Michigan, and like I said, Blake Corum, if he rushes for 80 yards in a game, that's high this year. JJ McCarthy, if he doesn't have too many games where he throws too much over 200 yards. Now, a lot of games they're sitting on the bench in the fourth quarter watching the second string in. There's no doubt that happens too. But if you go look, other than Roman Wilson with his 10 touchdowns and Blake Corum with his 16 touchdowns, if you look at yardage and all the other things across the board on the offense, nothing jumps out at you. It's just Michigan does whatever it needs to do in that moment. They need to run the ball, they'll run the ball. If they need to go up tempo, they don't do that very often, by the way. They can. They're very slow and methodical for the most part. They use up the play clock. They hand the ball off, and they're just like a tank that just runs through at a methodical pace for all 4 quarters. And that's how they win football games. But again, as I said a couple times earlier, they've been doing it against teams that are not nearly as good as Penn State. And I mentioned earlier how I think there'll be a lot of long drives, scoring drives, lower scoring game, less possessions. Yes, you also throw into the fact, as you mentioned, you have the top 2 defenses in the country working. It might be a little tougher to put those drives together. So either way, I'm taking a lower scoring game than we're used to with these teams. But yeah, you make a great point. The numbers are weird. Statistically, the numbers are weird. I think, like, people that talk about JJ McCarthy winning the Heisman, the numbers aren't there, again, because he only plays about 3 quarters a game. But maybe at the end of the day, people will say, well, he won. They had an undefeated season. They get to the playoffs. If that happens, maybe he'll get consideration then. But I know how media types are. The first thing they do, the people that vote, and people maybe don't watch every game, they look at the stats. They look at the stats, and they'll see a handful of quarterbacks, a ton of quarterbacks. Just go to the Pac-12. They all have like 3 times as many touchdowns as JJ McCarthy has this year. So the Heisman's a discussion for another day. But yeah, Michigan's very methodical in whatever weapons they choose to use.
I think that's another great segue, a great setup, Craig. I appreciate that. Going into the final segment where we will give our predictions and what needs to happen for both sides to win, and including a final score prediction here. Before we get to that, let's hear from another one of our great sponsors, and that is PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America, if you didn't know already. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including the pros and the sharks, you pick more than or less than on a 2 to 6 player stat projection and watch the winnings roll in. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. PrizePicks is really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes PrizePicks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. And this is a neat feature. With the PrizePicks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For NFL games and top 25 college football matchups, if you have a player who exits in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. So now what do you got to do? You go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege, code LockedOnCollege for that first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. And in this final segment, Craig and I will break down what needs to happen, ultimately understand the game flow of it, but we've already kind of explained what we think is going to happen. It's going to be a lower scoring game. When I look at the setup for a low scoring type of game, I look at conference, or in the NFL's case, divisions, right? Rivalry, whether this is an actual bona fide rivalry, however you want to describe it. These two teams do not like each other. Okay. Right. There was a little bit of a disagreement in the hallways of the locker rooms last year. These teams do not like each other. There's been the shade by Jim Harbaugh. There's been the shade by Penn State. Manny Diaz just had a clip today saying you got to know the signs and everything else. There's this whole, and Michigan's in the national spotlight and pretty much nationally disliked at this point. I don't know about hated, but nobody likes cheaters and corruption for the games that we all enjoy. Okay. Whether you're associated with something bad, whether it turns out to be true or not, this is all alleged. And I hope it's not, because I don't want it to corrupt our game. But if that's the case, man, you've been associated with it. There's these extensive investigations. This is not a good look, whether it is all pushed to the side or something like guilty. The charges are brought and everything. So as far as the game goes, right? The higher scoring games are for teams that are typically unfamiliar with each other. Penn State, Michigan know each other very well. James Franklin, Jim Harbaugh, the two schools, right? Penn State's 4-6 against Michigan in the past decade. This isn't exactly one-sided. Michigan has blown out Penn State. Penn State's blown out Michigan. And in this case, these two teams are pretty even matched. When you look at the rosters and the depth, Penn State has the home field advantage this time around. I really don't think that Michigan is as good as last year. They've taken a small step back, and it shows, because if Michigan still had that utter dominance, they would be running for 6-7 yards a carry, especially against the opponents that they played. The thing that I key in on, Penn State lost because they didn't have a Marvin Harrison Jr. and Ohio State did.
Yeah.
Michigan does not have a Marvin Harrison Jr. Kalen King can cover Roman Wilson. Johnny Dixon can cover Roman Wilson. Is Roman Wilson going to win some battles here and there? Absolutely. But it's going to be more of a 50-50 battle, and not Marvin Harrison Jr. absolutely taking over the game with 11 catches, 160 yards, and the touchdown. Michigan does not have that, and Penn State's run defense is holding teams to 1.9 yards per carry, held Ohio State to 1.9 yards per carry on the road. So Michigan does not have that thing that they used to bludgeon Penn State with a year ago.
Yeah.
Those are the big differences here.
Well, yeah, there are, it's interesting when you said a couple of times that this team isn't as good as last year's team. It's steadier than last year's team. But, you go back to their first 4 games this year, 3 of them without Jim Harbaugh, by the way. I mean, they were almost identical scores against much lesser teams. They were like in the 32-6 range, almost every one of them. And people were wondering, well, they're not even covering the spread. They're not blowing people out. Why are they not scoring 40, 50 points every night? So maybe you're onto something there. When we look at this game, it'll be a clean football game. These teams don't turn the ball over. Penn State doesn't turn the ball over.
1 interception, 1 fumble.
Yeah, and they don't get a lot of penalties. Michigan had a game where it had 0 penalties, and had the next game 1 penalty. I've never heard of that before. And Penn State doesn't make a lot of mistakes either. So it'll be clean. It'll be pure in that regard. I think one of maybe a couple different scenarios could shake out. If Michigan comes in and they haven't played anybody till this Saturday.
I haven't played in an environment like Beaver Stadium either.
I agree. So if they come in there and they show everybody, oh, wow, yeah, we really are good no matter who we're playing, then I could see maybe Michigan winning a 28-14 game if everything goes perfect. If they go in there and they realize that Penn State is more on their level and that crowd gets going, I could see it being a 2017 game either way. And what seems weird about that? It seems weird to see either Penn State or Michigan giving up 20 to 17 points, because they haven't yet. The defenses are that good. But so that might be, that's a little interesting. But yeah, I can very well see it being a field goal game either way if Penn State has a good day and gets some momentum going and they can hang with Michigan.
Here's how Penn State wins this game. And I hope there's people that are outside of the Penn State fan base to hear this. This is how they can do it. I'm not saying, because it's hard to predict turnovers. Yeah. JJ McCarthy threw how many picks against Bowling Green? And then after that, he's been almost flawless. Right. All 3 interceptions came against Bowling Green. Penn State is the number 1 team in setting up its offense. 27% of offensive drives have started in opponent's territory. That is by far the best in the entire country. 27%, Craig, of Penn State's drives have started on the other side of the 50 in opponent's territory. So if Penn State wins this game, they are going to have to force at least 1, maybe 2 turnovers to set up the offense to get, because that's what didn't happen against Ohio State. You almost had that type of play, but then Kalen King gets called for the whole pass interference, whatever it was against Marvin Harrison Jr., and that strip sack fumble was completely negated. If that still happens, maybe we're having a different conversation about what Penn State is in that game against Ohio State. You're at Beaver Stadium. I think these teams are a lot closer than people are giving them credit for. I've heard from people that, watch it from afar, that watch Big Ten football, college football from afar, because there's so many teams to spectate, and say Michigan's going to kill them. Penn State has no shot. The fan base, most of the fan base has sold out on this team. Well, here we go, 10-2 again. And that's when football teams in general, especially an emotional program like James Franklin and Penn State, they respond to that stuff.
Yeah.
When you stroke the ego, when you praise them and sing their praises after the UMass win, I don't think they took that Ohio State game as seriously as they should. I think they went in. Yes, they knew it was important, but Ohio State was very quiet, very timid. Penn State players were doing interviews. James Franklin messing with the reporters, right? All the jokes about just throwing it deep. And then you got a reality check. Penn State needed that against Ohio State. So now it's back to business. Michigan's a little distracted here. If Penn State's going to win this game, it's going to take 2 interceptions of JJ McCarthy, I think. I see, like you said, I see Michigan winning this game a lot of different ways. I see Penn State winning it a few ways.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take the fact that it's the perfect storm. It's at Beaver Stadium. The whole national media attention is on you, Jim Harbaugh and Michigan, and not in a good way. And then the motivation factor, Penn State will have a 418. That's all anybody's saying in my comments. That's all anybody's saying to Penn State players to mess with them, to try to make fun of them or whatever. That's just fuel to the fire, man. They take that stuff personally, and they've only talked about that number since it happened last season. I think Penn State wins. Now, Penn State is not as good at red zone defense as people think. So I will give a final score prediction here. I'm going to go 23-21. It stays under that 44.5, 45.5, wherever you're looking at the lines on FanDuel. It is 45.5. But I say 23-21, Penn State. Michigan will convert inside the red zone. Penn State isn't perfect there. They actually do let up touchdowns and don't hold teams to field goals as routinely as they should. So when Michigan does get into the red zone, I don't think they'll have any problems punching it in with Blake Corum and or Donovan Edwards. But I think Penn State can actually pull it off and do it. And the conversation is going to be completely changed here, Craig.
Well, that's a great stat you gave earlier about them playing on a short field. If they could pull that off, that would be a great advantage. And you're right, though. It seems like the whole season hinged on that strip fumble with the holding call against Ohio State, because that was the game, I think, right there. And that it just tells you, though, that Penn State is right there with the Michigans and Ohio States. And you and I talking here tonight, I think we're in agreement. In low 20s, the field goal either way. This game's going to be close. I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic. I've heard a lot of people say this way, oh man, I wish this was the primetime game. And we got the Buckeyes and Michigan State in primetime. And that's a 32-point spread in that one. I think this Michigan-Penn State game is going to be the thriller game of the weekend.
Yeah, and that's why Fox does it the way, and I'll keep that short because as we wrap up here, the reason Fox puts these games at noon is because that is the only game. All the eyeballs are going to be on Penn State, Michigan. Why compete with the mid-afternoon games, the SEC on CBS, the ESPN primetime 7 o'clock, 7:30 games? You can put this one at 8, have the whiteout in November. But the reason Fox does it is from a business standpoint, and they will get millions of viewers, much more than they would trying to compete for eyeballs in those other time slots. So they do it for the money, for the numbers. I get it. People don't agree with it, but that's why they do it, because they know everybody's going to watch Penn State, Michigan, and not Charlotte versus, Maryland, right? Let's just pick two teams. But that's who's in the noon slot. ESPN knows that they can put Alabama, LSU, that was last week, in the 7 o'clock slot. But Fox says, why should we compete with that when we can have everybody's attention in the noon slot? And that's what's going to happen. Everybody's going to be watching that game, whether it's the 107,000 plus. This might set a record. This might be the most attended game in Penn State Beaver Stadium history on Saturday. It's also going to be, I think it's going to set a record for the most watched as well.
Well, the millions of people watching, I'll be watching and you'll be there. So we'll have it covered. You'll be doing your post game there. I'll be going live on Locked On Big Ten YouTube as well. So it's going to be huge. It's going to be worthy of everybody watching, and I can't wait.
Craig, I really appreciate the time. I'm glad we could do the crossover. Become an everydayer, everybody. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On Big Ten. Help out both shows wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. You can comment your score predictions and what you think is going to be key for Penn State versus Michigan. Craig, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Zach. Good talking to you.
That's going to do it for us on this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. We'll have more coverage of the game, analysis, breakdowns, as Penn State and Michigan will battle it out on Saturday, November 11th at noon in Beaver Stadium.